We are good. So, I'm going to explain a little bit about the brain and brain function. Okay? Explain why sarcasm doesn't work very well with kids. Okay? So, here is my version of the brain. Okay? And so if there's anybody here that is a neuroscientist or anything like that, if you could just please keep your comments to yourself, that would be wonderful. Okay, so this isn't drawn to scale, by the way. Okay, so we have, I'm going to divide the brain into three different parts, and this is sometimes referred to as the triune brain. And so we have back here the brain stem, and sometimes that part of the brain is referred to as the lizard brain or the reptilian brain. It's called the lizard brain because that's the part of the brain that lizards have. So when you approach a lizard on a wall, what does the lizard do?
Freeze.
It freezes, and then what? Then it runs, and then it runs, right? So it freezes, and then it runs. So what happens is this part of the brain is built for survival. When it feels that there's danger in the environment or feels fear, what it does is it kicks out one of three responses in order to stay alive. You mentioned one, it freezes. Okay. We also have runs or flight, right? And then sometimes it also fights. So you've heard of the fight or flight response, right? So this is fight, flight, or freeze response. And the reason it does that, again, is in order to keep the lizard alive. So then we have another part of our brain, a more developed part of our brain, sometimes called the mammalian brain. And this part of the brain has to do more with social and emotional development. So for instance, have you ever seen a lizard that looked happy? One that looked sad, bored, depressed, giddy? Not really, right? But have you ever seen any other animal that looked happy? Like a dog. Have you ever seen a dog that looked happy? About a dog that looked sad? Right? My dog, 1-year-old Cocker Spaniel, she whines when we're not around. Right, you can tell. So, what about social? You ever see lizards hanging out together? Playing around together? Not really. What about other animals? Do other animals group together? Such as what? Sheep. Absolutely. Sheep do. Lemurs, right? Lots of lemurs do.
Bears.
Huh?
Bears.
Bears do, right? Prairie dogs. A lot of these animals tend to group together, right? Some, like regular dogs do, cats do. All right. And we also have a part in our brain that has to do with connecting with others. Have you ever walked into a room where people had been fighting right before you got in there, but then when you went in there, they'd stopped right before you got in there, right? But you could still feel something's wrong? Yeah? They have terms for that. What do they call that?
Oh, no.
There's tension in the air. You could feel the tension. You could cut the tension with a knife, right? So it's so common that people actually have terms for it. There's a part of our brain that picks up on something's going on and it doesn't feel safe. Okay? And then we have this part of the brain, the frontal lobes. And in the frontal lobes of the brain you have things such as problem solving, impulse control, language acquisition, being able to stick to a task until completion, knowing how to start a task. All of these things occur in the frontal lobe of the brain. Those are sometimes referred to as the executive functioning skills. Right? So, what happens is information comes up through the brainstem on its way to be processed in the frontal lobe. However, if, as it goes up through the brain stem, if it feels that something that's happening is either dangerous or it feels fear, it gets rerouted and doesn't get processed in the frontal lobe. So, let me give you an example of what my little girl did when she was like 5. She developed an addiction to drawing on the wall. Anybody else have a kid that has gone through that stage of drawing on the wall? So, like, she would draw these little hearts and smiley faces everywhere, right? So we would see them behind couches and other places, and we would tell her, Eliza, you can't draw on the wall. If you want to draw on anything, draw on paper. You can't draw on the wall. And then one time I go into her closet, right, on the other side of her door, filled with smiley faces and hearts, right? And then one time she starts drawing one, and someone sees her, what are you doing? And how does she respond?
That's fine.
I don't know. Right? So does a child, when you respond to a child that way, why did you do that? Do they ever say, well, Dad, I mean, look at the wall, really. Look how boring it is. You're creating a mural in your honor. Right? Do they say that? No. They respond, oh no, right? So the reason that we use empathy is to calm the brainstem. Okay? When the brainstem becomes triggered and becomes overactive and the frontal lobes shut down, no learning takes place. Okay? In order for learning to take place, the child needs to feel safe. So we use empathy to calm the brainstem, then information gets processed more fully in the front part of the brain. Any thoughts or questions about this, or comments? So, I'm going to explain a little bit about emotional regulation for a moment. This line right here represents baseline emotion. Okay, how are you doing? I'm doing okay. Not doing good, not doing bad. I'm doing fine. Okay, so this part over here and this part over here represents the ups and the downs of the day. And most of us fluctuate throughout the day with our emotions. Right? So this is, you wake up in the morning, you go to the pantry, and you find your favorite cereal. And then you go to the fridge, oh, there's no milk. Right? Up, down, all throughout the day, and that's normal. But what happens is when our emotions go over and above or down below these tolerable limits, these areas right here represent dysregulation. Okay, our emotion is over and above that which we can handle on our own. Does that make sense? Have you guys ever done something or said something when you were angry or frustrated that later on you thought, man, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. Has your spouse ever done something or said something? More likely them than you, right? When they were angry or frustrated. So, could it be possible that kids, when they're angry and frustrated, tend to act out more than when they're feeling emotionally intolerable ranges? Does that make sense? So, now the next concept is most misbehaviors stem from when a child is dysregulated. It's important that we can see the difference between dysregulation and disobedience. Okay? When a child is emotionally struggling, a lot of times that's dysregulation. They can be emotionally struggling and yell and I hate you and all of those things. That's more about emotionally dysregulated. When a child thinks, okay, mom is cooking, but I really want that cookie. Right? And they come up with a plan to go ahead and get that cookie.
Premeditated.
It's premeditated, right? That's much more about disobedience than it is about dysregulation. So if the child is emotionally put together, but they're still doing something like when a parent limits video game playing, and then you hear this quietness upstairs, right? And then you start going upstairs, and then you hear TV go off, and then a child run away, right? That is more about disobedience. I wanted to play the game, and I couldn't play the game. So, any questions about this so far? No? So, now going back to this part of the brain, right? This part that has to do with connecting. A guy named Dan Siegel, who's a a therapist, but also researcher on the brain, and he talks a lot about mindfulness and attachment and things like this. What he says is the calmer amygdala has the ability to calm the dysregulated amygdala. So if I am angry and frustrated, or how easy is it to calm a crying infant when you're feeling angry and frustrated? It's not very easy at all, right? So we need to be able to be calm ourselves in order to then help the child calm down. So if I've lost it emotionally, I can't help someone else find it. I need to first find it so that I can help somebody else find it. Does that make sense? So, the idea of emotional regulation, if I respond to my child with anger and frustration, these two parts of his brain start to shut off. Okay? And then they're in that brainstem. If I see my child do something and that part of my brain shuts off, oftentimes kids feel like, oh, Dad, they're just angry at me. Or a younger child will feel very scared when the parent is not available to them. Right? So we're angry and frustrated, and they know deep down I'm dependent upon them for my survival. So if they're angry with me, oh no, I may not survive. And it isn't a conscious thought, but it's a physiological understanding how they're dependent upon us. Okay? So, the idea is I'm going to use that sadness and empathy, right, in order to calm the brainstem, open up learning so that the child can learn from the situation rather than react in fear. Any questions? Is this helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How will this apply to you in your parenting? What would you say? In what way is this helpful for you?
Love and Logic talks about, anger and frustration leads to misbehavior, and that sort of visualizes the process that leads to that conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah. Because before it's just an opinion.
Right.
Now it's like, oh, okay, I see why that works. Right? Yeah, that makes sense. Any other things for you? Why?
It's kind of good to hear it less as a judgment call, like, you shouldn't be angry, it's bad to be angry with your kids, rather than it's not functional or it's not beneficial because it's just, you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve.
Exactly. And also, we as parents can get dysregulated pretty easily. When you see your child putting peanut butter in the DVD player, that's dysregulating, right? And you're like, oh, hold on. Grab a pillow. Go a deep breath. Okay. Oh, buddy. Oh, buddy, this is sad. This is sad. Because that's the DVD player that we were going to give you for Christmas this year. That is awful. Right? So, we'll wrap it for you so it's exciting. So, again, that empathy and sadness before the consequences. Okay, so move on.